to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel-Maholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill, and whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him."
Immediately he made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you onto the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
Thank you very much. I love a reading that feels like something from Game of Thrones. That first one was, wasn't it? And the second one to a degree, but the first one in particular. Tonight is an unusual gathering in our calendar, because alongside everything we normally do of singing and reading scripture and our wonderful discussion that really makes the gathering and praying together, it's also our annual church meeting, or as a registered charity, it's our AGM, our annual general meeting. Which means that at some point this evening, Nicky and Rebecca are legally obliged to talk to you about accounts Try to contain your excitement, everyone. There'll be an annual report, there'll be trustee appointments, the sort of things that the Charity Commission quite rightly expects us as a charity to do. And perhaps it would be very easy to see all of that as the boring administrative bit that we have to squeeze into the middle of our worship. But this work is entrusted to our hands. There are things that we take responsibility for. There are decisions we have to make. There are accounts we have to look after. We have this extraordinary little community that somehow has been entrusted to all of us as trustees. But none of that means that everything depends just on us. And I think Elijah, in that first reading, needed reminding of that. When we meet Elijah, things aren't going very well. Actually, that's putting it quite mildly. Just before this passage, Elijah has reached the point where he basically says to God, I've had enough. He's exhausted, he's frightened, he's isolated, and he's convinced that he's the only one left. And I think there's something painfully human about that, because when you've been carrying something for a long time, it can begin to feel as though everything depends on you. Maybe that's a job. Maybe it's caring for somebody. Maybe it's keeping your family going. Maybe it's fighting for something you believe in. Maybe it's trying to hold a community together. And perhaps some of us know that feeling particularly well because we've spent parts of our lives simply fighting to have any place at all. For us as queer people, churches haven't always been places where we could simply just turn up and belong. Some of us have had to argue for our place, defend our relationships, explain ourselves, justify ourselves, find another church, and sometimes another church after that. Sometimes we've had to build the spaces we needed ourselves. That's what the gathering is, because no one else was going to build it for us. And when you've done that for long enough, you can start believing that if you stop holding everything up, the whole thing will collapse. Elijah has reached that point, and God tells him to go and stand on a mountain. And then comes this really extraordinary sequence where a great wind tears through the mountains, but God isn't in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God isn't in the earthquake. Then fire, but God isn't in the fire. And then silence. That strange phrase which different translations of the Bible struggle to capture, but it's a still small voice, a gentle whisper, the sound of sheer silence. And there is where Elijah recognises God. I love that. I can resonate with that as well. We're really good as Christians at looking for God in the spectacular. We look for a dramatic moment, an enormous change, a miraculous intervention, something we can point and say, there, God did that. But so much of the life of faith isn't like that. Sometimes God is actually found in the quieter things, in somebody turning up, in somebody crocheting a hat, in somebody making a cup of tea, noticing the person sitting on their own, in someone sending a message just saying, are you okay? In somebody opening the building for us to use, doing the accounts, putting the annual report together. In somebody sitting through a trustees meeting where they probably would rather be out with their friends. In somebody quietly saying, I could probably do that. None of it looks looks like wind and earthquakes and fire, but that is what communities are built of. It's those things. And then we come to the story from Matthew. The disciples are in a boat. Jesus has sent them ahead, and sometime during the night the weather turns against them, and the boat is now being battered by the waves, and Jesus comes towards them, walking across the water, which, quite understandably, terrifies the people on the boat, because they think they're seeing a ghost. And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid." Peter replies saying, "Well, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And so Jesus says, "Come." So Peter gets out of the boat, and for a moment, it works. He's walking towards Jesus. And then he notices the wind, which, if you think about it, is slightly ridiculous, because the wind hasn't appeared then, it was already stormy. That's why the boat was being battered about in the first place. But suddenly, Peter notices the wind, and his fear takes over. He begins to sink and cries, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reaches out his hand. I think sometimes we've told this story as though it's mainly about Peter failing. If only he'd had more faith, if only he hadn't looked down, if only he hadn't doubted. But let's not forget, Peter actually got out of the boat. No one else did. Peter took a risk. Peter tried something. And when it went wrong, Jesus didn't stand there saying, "Well, Peter, there's an important lesson here about inadequate faith." No. He reached out his hand immediately. And perhaps that's worth remembering whenever we talk about stepping out in faith. Because faith isn't certainty. Faith isn't knowing that everything will work. Faith isn't about never being frightened either. Sometimes faith is hearing someone say, "Come," putting one leg over the other side of the boat and thinking, "Well, here goes." Maybe that's not a bad image for us at the gathering. Maybe we could be a little boat. Not an enormous one. And if tonight's photo shoot is anything to go by, it's not always a particularly sensible one either. Occasionally, this boat is held together with prayer, stubbornness, almost weekly technical glitches, and somebody remembering who took home the Mevo. But we're still here. And over the years, people have climbed into this boat carrying all sorts of stories. Some carrying joy, some carrying grief, some carrying scars from other churches. I just scrolled too far then, sorry. Some absolutely certain about what it is that they think they believe. And some that have no remote knowledge of faith whatsoever. Some who come here because they're looking for God. And some who came because they're looking for people like them. And were quite surprised to discover that God might be hanging out here too. But somehow together, we've kept rowing on this boat. Not perfectly. We've definitely got things wrong, and there's definitely been storms. There have been times where we've wondered what comes next. But guys, we're still here. And tonight, once a year, we stop rowing for a moment and we look around our boat. And that's essentially what our annual church meeting is. We ask, how are we doing? What happened this year? What have we been entrusted with? How have we used our money? What have we done? Who have we served? Where have we seen God? And where might God be saying, come? Because an annual report isn't simply a record of our activity. And accounts shouldn't just be numbers on a page. They're part of the story of what our donors have entrusted us with and how we've honoured the resources that have been entrusted to us. If we think about it, and if we entrust our finances to God and approach our decisions with prayer, our budgets are theological documents. Where we spend our money says something about what matters to us. Where we spend our time says something about what matters to us. The relationships we nurture says something about what matters to us. I love it when parents of young children celebrate birthdays of their children and say, that's another year of keeping my child alive. And it would be very easy for tonight's question to simply be, have we successfully kept a registered charity going for another year? I hope we have, yes. That would make our lives very easy. But actually the bigger question is, what has God entrusted to this little boat that is the gathering? And what have we done with it? Elijah also discovers on that mountain, don't forget that he already thought that he was the only one left, that everything depended on him. And God's answer is, no, Elijah, it doesn't. There are other people. There's a future beyond this. There are people who will carry things that you won't need to carry. There are things you need to do, but there's also things you need to hand on. That's important in any community, because a healthy community can't depend on one person or two people or a group of people. And churches are really bad at this sometimes. You find someone who's good at something and think, brilliant, they can do that forever and ever. Amen. But ministry has seasons. Leadership has seasons. Sometimes faithfulness means taking something up. And sometimes faithfulness means knowing when it's time to put it down. Tonight, we will do both of those things. We'll be announcing 2 trustee appointments. One person continuing as co-treasurer for another 3-year term, and someone else beginning a new 3-year term in a new role as partnership and funding trustee. And later we'll be praying for those 2 people. They're taking on responsibility on our boat. But we're also going to say thank you to Ali, who served as a trustee for 6 years, 2 complete terms, and she's decided that the point at which she wants to put herself, she's decided that this is the point at which she won't put herself forward for another role. And that matters too. Because 6 years of service means 6 years of meetings and decisions and responsibility, of all those bits of trusteeship that most people never see. My goodness, Ali, life has changed so much in the last 6 years, hasn't it? Got a little boy. And tonight, we get to say thank you. You've carried this, but you don't have to carry it forever. Because perhaps there are times when some people get off the boat. Some people steer the boat, some people keep an eye on where we're going, some people notice the storm, some people are desperately trying to work out whether we've got enough money to repair the boat. And sometimes somebody who's been rowing for 6 years is entitled to put the blinking oar down for a bit and that's all right. No one is on the boat on their own. We are a group. But let's not, there's something I don't want us to miss in Matthew's story as well. We spend so much time talking about Peter walking on water that we forget how the story ends. Peter and Jesus get back into the boat, and the wind ceases, and the people in the boat worship Jesus. The story doesn't finish with Peter having some amazing individual spiritual experience. It finishes back in the community, back among the others, back in the boat. And there's something beautiful about that, because Christianity isn't supposed to be some heroic solo expedition. We're supposed to need one another, to carry one another, to notice when someone else is tired, and we're supposed to take turns doing the rowing. We're supposed to make room when someone new climbs aboard. And perhaps especially in a queer Christian community, we're supposed to know something about the importance of making room for new people. Because many of us know what it is to stand on the shore whilst someone else tells us there isn't room on the boat. Or that there might be room if we change something about ourselves first, if we hide something, if we don't mention the person we love, if we accept that we'll always occupy a slightly lesser place. The gathering exists because we dared to imagine something different. A community where queer people didn't simply have to be allowed in, but could belong, could lead, could question, could love, could doubt, could serve, could discover God, and be entirely ourselves. The gathering isn't perfect. Not because this particular organisation must exist forever. No institution gets that promise, but people do matter. The people already on the boat matter, and the people somewhere out there who haven't found us yet matter too. Perhaps somebody who still thinks Christianity couldn't possibly have room for them. Perhaps somebody who has quietly walked away from a church and thinks they'll never go back. Perhaps somebody doesn't even know what they believe anymore. Perhaps somebody who will walk through those doors one Sunday evening and discover unexpectedly that there is room for them here. That's what we're stewarding. Not a charity number, not a bank account, not just a service, but a space in which people might encounter one another, and perhaps in the silence encounter God. So tonight we'll do something that churches have done in many different forms for a very long time. We'll remember what we've done over the last year. We're going to give account, we're going to give thanks, we're going to let someone put something down, and we're going to ask someone else to pick something up. We're going to pray for those entrusted with leadership, and we're going to ask what God might be calling us to next. And perhaps some of what comes next will feel safe. Perhaps some of it won't. Perhaps there'll be moments where we'll hear that word, come. And someone's going to have to put a leg over the other side of the boat. Perhaps we'll try something and discover that it doesn't work. Perhaps we'll occasionally sink. But if this story tells us anything, surely it is that sinking isn't the end of the story. Because there's a hand reaching out towards us, and there are people in the boat waiting to pull us back in. So perhaps tonight, as we look back over another year of the gathering, the prayer isn't, God, make sure nothing changes. It isn't. It isn't, God, make us successful. Perhaps it's something much simpler. God, help us Help us recognise your voice when you say, come. Give us courage when it's our turn to step out. Give us humility when it's our time to step back. And give us wisdom when it's our turn to steer. Give us gratitude for those who've rowed before us. And when the waves get rough and someone begins to sink, make us a community that reaches out a hand. Because this work has been entrusted to all of our hands. It doesn't depend on any one pair of hands. We're all in the boat together. And Christ is here with us too. Amen. So, we are still going to have a discussion this evening. However, it's very gathering-centred tonight. It's very blue. So 4 questions, and I'm going to invite us to maybe, we'll have a few people go out outside, but maybe just have this conversation with the people around us as